Now, you got to keep in mind that this is the first Raw that I watched beginning to end. I can't even remember when I've done this, but I'm hoping to do this regularly. Um, Obviously, they open with the Becky Lynch thing, where she announces that she's pregnant and that Asuka has in fact won the title at Money in the Bank, not just a contract. In typical WWE style, I guess it's unclear whether she has a contract as well as the title. I would assume that she does not. Regardless, we go into after we show the Becky Lynch thing, they go into the opening clip package and all that kind of stuff. One thing that strikes me right away is that in light of the fact that the shows are completely different because they don't have an audience, and we're in the situation that we're all in, that they didn't change the open. I would suggest doing that because, again, it is just another reminder of better times where you had a crowd and there was all this kind of pulsing excitement that the show is not going to be able to match. I know this seems like a minor detail, but it's something to keep in mind. Sort of an acknowledgement of like, okay, we're in a different time, we're doing a different kind of show. That way you can return to that kind of thing once crowds return and it feels like an upgrade. I know it sounds really strange to say, but the contrast of there's no crowd and there's no energy coming from the crowd to showing this open where you have this unusual, like, oh my gosh, look at all this energy, look at all these things, look at all this crowd noise and this pyro and all this stuff. It just comes across as really strange, but that could just be to me. Then you have this thing with Randy Orton and Edge. Randy Orton's promo is basically, I challenge you for just a straight up wrestling match and you have doubts. That brings Edge out. The one thing I noticed about this Raw is almost everything is set up with a promo and then somebody comes out to interrupt the promo. And they do this again and again and again and again. It's really tiresome. And it just, again, it makes this show, which is 3 hours long, feel like it's dragging on instead of this thing that moves at a really good clip. Doing the same thing again and again and again and again, I don't know, it just doesn't really lend itself towards anything, especially when you don't have a crowd to react to these things. Edge comes out and starts to cut a promo, and Randy Orton just basically cuts him off and goes, yes or no? And then Edge goes, yeah, I accept the challenge. And then Orton leaves. Really odd, flat segment. It's strange because the chemistry that these two had in creating the angle, and then we really got literally and figuratively beat over the head with their match at WrestleMania, and now they're having to go completely in reverse and make the fact that they're going to have a regular wrestling match a novelty. Very interesting, but very, very strange. And because we don't go back to this for the rest of the show, kind of a weird way to open the show, really. I mean, the Becky Lynch thing is good. Of course, it was the best thing that they did last week. And it's going to lead indirectly to the angle that we have going with the Kabuki Warriors and Nia Jax that gets sprinkled in throughout the show. But this Orton and Edge thing is not going to play out during the show. So it seemed like a very unusual choice to put at the top. Yeah, that's my thoughts on those segments. The next series made a linear sense, at least. They showed Seth Rollins previously attacking Rey Mysterio, pushing his eye into the corner of the stairs. A very visceral kind of thing, very brutal. And you can see signs of, without a crowd to react to regular spots, they're having to do stuff that plays well in replays and creates a visceral connection independent of somebody reacting to it from the outside. I think that's actually a good move. And obviously pushing Rey Mysterio's eye is a brutal, brutal thing. Seth comes out in a suit and looks really good. They're really finding a way to sort of create this main event look for Seth. It sounds crazy because he's been main event on and off for years, but they're going in this new direction where he's sort of this cult leader type. I will say that the Seth Rollins thing, if you want to compare it to something in AEW, obviously it would be the Dark Order. And the Dark Order, even though it's gotten, has more bodies involved and this whole look with the masks and this mass recruitment that's gone on, I would say the Seth Rollins thing, sort of starting small with just him and the one guy, and then slowly building, and we see this story play out during this show, is far more effective. And it could come down to something as simple as Seth Rollins is really ready to pull this off, and Brody Lee's still finding his way with his, my opinion. Seth in the suit looks great. Immediately owns up to losing to Drew McIntyre. That's another weird theme that we have, where we have the heels admitting that they've lost a big match in the recent past. It's really strange. And but again, it wouldn't be so strange if they all didn't do it. Randy Orton did it, and now Seth Rollins is doing it immediately. Again, just openly admitting and blunting their effectiveness. Like Jake Roberts used to always say when he was a heel, when he lost a big match, like when he lost that first big match to Steamboat, he said he just denied it. That way he could keep his heat and they could keep doing it. And I don't see any fallacy in that rationale at all. I just find it really strange that like Orton and Seth Rollins, who are supposed to be two of their biggest stars, immediately go like, yeah, I lost a match. And then Seth kind of takes the role of, with Rey Mysterio, it's unfortunate but necessary, I had to do this, and you're welcome that I did it. Again, a similar feel to Orton. All their top-level heels seem to have this similar feel. And again, it's the same as guys nowadays who seem like they wear the same gear or very similar gear as their opponents. There's just somebody not doing quality control. That was my number one note from this watching Raw and the WWE in general. Is there somebody doing quality control? Is there somebody making sure the same stories aren't being told repeatedly with different people, that the same looks aren't being copied by or very similar with people who are facing each other in a match? If you got Aleister Black, who's your guy, and he's a striking guy, and he's got a very simple look with black trunks, nobody else should be wearing black trunks. And maybe I'm being too harsh about that, but I don't think so. Okay, back on track here. So Humberto comes out, Ray's my idol. If Ray's your idol, then why aren't you rushing the ring and fucking swinging? Nobody makes logical choices. And again, if you want it where he's not swinging, then as he's storming down, you can have Seth Rollins stop him on the mic. Hold up. I know you want to avenge your idol, and here, I'm going to give you a chance to do it. That would be a much better way than him sort of easing his way to the ring when Seth Rollins is saying all this infuriating stuff, did all this horrible stuff, and yet this guy who loves Rey Mysterio is not going to come to just get vengeance immediately. It all comes across as very sterile and static and phony, right? So he's going to get to fight Murphy instead, who's Seth Rollins' guy. And then, and then Murphy beats him up. Okay, so we're going to have a match between those guys later. But then Aleister Black shows up. All right. That's a segment that works well enough. But again, it's just this idea that everything feels the same, looks the same, or too similar. But I will say that I like Seth Rollins in a suit, and I like where they're going with this, and I like the payoff that they did later on. It was unusual, and I think it worked their way out of problems. And when they're intersecting groups of people that seemingly have their own angle and merging them into Seth Rollins' thing, I think it is very effective. And it was a great way to set up the show. Again, I think this thing should have been the open. And I think they should have saved Orton and Edge for later on in the show, since their thing wasn't going to translate to the rest of the show. The next thing we got going on, so we got King Corbin. So now I guess guys are able to just switch from brand to brand whenever they feel like it. So I heard that they're allowed to do it up to 4 times, but it seems like Charlotte's already done it 2 times, and she's going to do it a 3rd time at SmackDown. Again, when you set up your own rules of engagement and the rules of your world and kind of the physics of how your thing is supposed to operate, and you constantly violate them, it completely invalidates them. And I think it's another unfortunate similarity that WWE is showing to WCW, because again, when you go against your own logic, and the irony that, by the way, that all of these things are happening in Florida, where Eddie Graham, who ran Florida at one point, was such a stickler for details like that. It's one of the reasons I really love Eddie Graham's stuff. I mean, if he was going to have, let's say, a babyface get beat up, he would make sure that his head babyface, his top babyface, was announced to be not in the building. So you weren't going, well, why isn't Dusty saving so-and-so from a beatdown? Just little details like that, which again, people think, oh, it doesn't really matter in the big picture, but it does matter, because you're setting a precedent and you're setting up audience expectations. And you need to come through. Yes, it's more work to think of shit like that. Yes, it's a much more difficult thing to do. But this trend in wrestling of it doesn't matter and we're just going to just write things out straight and whatever, it gets reflected in the larger product, not just the things, individual little nitpicky things we're talking about, but it sort of takes on a pervasive feel of, it's a show that feels like it's not orchestrated. It's just a bunch of guys playing, and they don't have the skill of talented jazz musicians to get into a groove together. That's what wrestling feels like right now. Even in AEW, which I think is putting out a better overall product, still shows signs of a lack of fidelity and a lack of orchestration. When King Corbin comes out, he's yelling at the ref. And then we go to a commercial. This is another weird theme of this Raw to me, is when you had moments that were like, felt like they were building heat, they would just cut to a commercial, which I guess is supposed to be a hook and drag. Like, oh, you're going to want to stay through this commercial. But there's a number of times where it just killed segments dead, and then they're having to restart. There was a lot of that going on in the show. You had a promo by Liv Morgan. Again, I don't know why they don't put the names of these guys up when they're speaking. They're just assuming their audience is the same 1.7 million people who watch the show and nobody new watches. It's like they've given up on this notion that we can get new people. They need to have graphics up, and I say this about AEW all the time. Somebody's fucking talking, put up a graphic of their goddamn name and keep it up there so we can get to know these people. Golly, man, it's just 101 stuff, and I can't believe I'm having to say this about the biggest wrestling company in the world, right? So she's bringing up the fact that she had a shot at the women's champ, but it fell short. And then Charlotte's here from SmackDown, and then Ruby Riott comes out, and we're going to commercial. So are Charlotte and Ruby Riott having a match? Like, Ruby Riott's coming out. They sort of make this connection that she used to be with Liv Morgan, but nothing's really directly addressed. It's just, it feels really hodgepodgey and a mess. It feels like a first draft. A lot of these things feel like a first draft. So we go to a commercial. They bring up the Undertaker documentary, which is phenomenal, by the way, and part 2 is absolutely phenomenal. And I couldn't help but think, like, why wasn't this well-produced, really great, engaging stuff part of Raw? Why wouldn't you just put it in there? I guess it's we want to get people to go get the network. I would say most of the people watching Raw who are still sticking it out and watching Raw probably have the network. If that wasn't the case, why would they go, we're going to release part 2 right after Raw? Man, you've got so much great programming on the network. I think you're remiss to not share them with Raw, even if it's just, here's 3 minutes of the Undertaker documentary. Why not? Right? Why not? So we come back from commercial. Well, and then we have another NXT commercial for Rhea versus Shirai. A lot of like cross promotion stuff happens, but NXT really does come across as the weak sister in all of this, just because the production looks not as crisp. the black and yellow color scheme, I think, really make it look like it's unfinished. That's the general just look of NXT is they haven't figured out what they want to do yet, so everything's just black. That's really how it comes across. And again, to a wrestling fan, that stuff might not matter, but again, have we given up on the notion that new people might want to watch and engage with this shit? I just don't. I just who's in. I just, some of the decisions are just so inexplicable to me. All right, so we got Charlotte versus Ruby Riott. It's a squash, and I mean Charlotte taps her quickly with the figure eight. And just when I'm sort of losing hope that we're going to do anything really engaging, this Lashley MVP promo. And Lashley, not too long ago, was sort of involved in this kind of silly stuff. But this stuff with MVP is really great. I got to say, MVP is somebody who I really didn't think much of, but I've become a big fan of in the last couple of weeks. And I think seeing that thing on the wrestlers about him really helped that, which again, I think the WWE should realize that if there's great stuff going on about somebody, put that out there. But MVP cuts this great promo building Lashley, and it made me feel very hopeful. I think, AEW does such a good job using these guys who are a little long in the tooth, like Jake Roberts or Arn Anderson or whatever, or DDP, and using them in this great way of building the new guys. And I think they're using MVP in that way also, but MVP really does have the feel of a guy who can still go when he needs to. So they're kind of getting the best of both worlds. So just really high marks for MVP for me. Yeah. I'm probably just going to talk about this in one clip right now, even though it takes place throughout the show. So we're still in the first 20-25 minutes of the show. We get this Viking Raiders versus Street Profits basketball game. And this shit blows, man. It's just so badly produced and written. It really made me feel for the Viking Raiders and Street Profits. Think about the segments that we're used to seeing that just elevated guys to the moon. I mean, think about Lie, Cheat, and Steal. And again, they weren't overly produced, amazing things, but they really let the personalities of the guys carry the day. These segments are just fucking terrible, man. They're just written so badly. It's not funny. I don't know who this would be funny towards. And then they're going to have an axe throwing thing. And again, I think that there's a potential there, albeit small potential, of, okay, you're playing our game basketball, which it turns out the Viking Raiders, who are terrible at it, are actually not terrible at it, but they were just pretending to be terrible at it. What? And then they're going to do this axe throwing thing. And then we don't go back to this thing, by the way. They cram in another 4 or 5 segments of this axe throwing shit, but they don't do it for 2 hours. I'm not kidding. Who's producing this fucking thing? Who's producing it? It's insane. It's insane. It's almost like they said, we know this shit's not really good and nobody's watching the 3rd hour anyway, so we'll just save it till then. But instead, when it comes back, it really feels like, oh yeah, this shit. What? And what if I was coming in halfway through the show? I would have fucking awful. And the axe throwing stuff that they do later with these lame camera cuts and smash cuts, and then the thing about the one axe going through the cop's windshield and the cops going, well, I'm going to let you off because I find the one with the longer beard cute and the other one I don't. And the Street Profits go, oh, and all of the extras who were there, that Renaissance fair looking folks, and God, it just did nothing to elevate this shit. And again, you forgot, are these guys headed towards a match with each other? Is that the point of all of this? It's a show. This is supposed to be the joy in the show, but it feels joyless. It really does. I mean, you had this great shit with Becky Lynch last week, which they don't capitalize on in an effective way. And you got this shit with the axe throwing. I can honestly say, when we used to do bits in PCW, comedy bits, I'm not going to say all of them hit. I'll just say that there was an attempt to make them funny, an attempt to make them understandable without making them overly simplistic and stupid. This thing manages to feel overly complicated, yet insulting to your intelligence all at the same time. That's a hard trick to pull off. But it didn't do the Street Profits any favors. It doesn't do the Viking Raiders any favors. What are they trying to convey with these guys? That they're really clever and witty? Fail. That they're badasses? Fail. So what the fuck's the point? My God. I mean, I hope wrestling people who are listening to this, whether it's from one of the bigger companies or indies, realize if you're going to do a bit, you got to write shit 3 times. And none of this shows evidence of this. This is something that a writer teacher taught me, and this is great shit. Fucking remember this and write it down. You write things once to get the ideas down. You edit them and write them a second time to perfect them. Then you write it a third time to give it the feel that you just came up with it, so it has a spontaneous feel. That's a great fucking lesson. And obviously whoever wrote the Street Profits and Viking Raiders thing did not do that in the slightest. They barely wrote it once, and it's awful and fucking dreadful. I'm glad I got that out of the way, because now I don't have to refer to the Viking Raiders Street Profits shit anymore. So Kaori Sane. That's how you'd pronounce it if you're Japanese, not sane. Celebrating Asuka. Nice moment, right? Should be. They're going over their accomplishments, which I also think is a good move. And again, introducing us to these people if we don't know who they are, which is so important to do, but they get away from. Nia Jax comes out and says something. Comes into the ring. And Asuka does the logical thing. She's one of the few that does the logical thing, which is, fuck you, Nia Jax. I'm going to attack you. And attacks her and knocks Nia Jax from the ring in a way that looks very effective. Hopefully this is the end of it, but of course it's not the end of it. I might as well take this section to go over all the Asuka and Nia Jax stuff. So in a segment that happens later on, and at least there's some continuity and they're spaced out in a way that's logical, unlike the axe-throwing fucking promos, that Nia Jax catches Carrie by herself playing a recorder. Again, really dumb, really stupid. That she's, again, everybody's made to look like a fucking moron. I hate that, man. But Nia Jax attacks her, lays her out. Then we have another segment where Asuka confronts Nia Jax. And instead of, logically, Nia Jax should fight back on Asuka this time because she's not caught by surprise and demolish her if they're setting her up as a challenge. Instead, Asuka, takes her out. Pulls on her big fucking hair pigtail things and then fucking drops her. Just fucking weird. Where are they going with this shit? Right? Where are they going with it? Asuka is champion. How's that gonna go? When you're following up from the Becky Lynch stuff, I think you got to give a nod towards that was really emotional, and I'm really proud to have won this. And if you want to set Nia Jax up as the challenger, that's fine too. But they went to everything again and again and again. I don't know, just really weird. But again, at least they're doing something different. The way the pattern of the rest of the show is going, the rest of the segments, it would have been Nia Jax is set up in this match with Carrie first, and then, blah, 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 blah. So they're trying to go about it in a different way, and points for that. And Asuka is an engaging and interesting personality. But her having the title... and Nia Jax, is that how titles work? I guess. You just make a very aggressive challenge, and that's how you determine who the challenger is. I guess that's the problem when you have this thing of well, you won the title, you didn't really win Money in the Bank. So what does that mean about that briefcase? I guess it just disappears and it doesn't matter anymore. Again... Does it sound like I'm picking nits? Of course I am. That's what I'm supposed to do. And it does beg the question, why aren't they more concerned? Why am I more concerned about what the fuck they're doing than they are? That's certainly how it appears. And if it's not really the case, then they have a bigger problem, which is they don't know what they're doing. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they're just not putting the time and the thought into this that they need to. So we set up King Corbin versus Drew McIntyre. And again, this is another thing that I thought that they did well. They spaced it out throughout the show. They had a little blurb about King Corbin in the beginning. And now they have this thing about him challenging Drew McIntyre, and then we're going to see that payoff at the end. It does beg the question, why is Edge and Randy Orton at the top of the show? And I know I keep going back to this, but again, each show, each 3 hour, for God's sakes, oh my God, 3 hour show needs to be treated as an individual entity, not just a thing that's part of a story that goes before it started and will continue after it started, but they need to be conscious of the fact that we need to put on the best 3 hour show that we can, that it can't just all feel like infomercials, right? And so again, if I think, why do you not open with this or the Seth thing and just put Edge and Orton somewhere in the middle? Why have it at the beginning? Because the story that you're going to tell throughout this night is about King Corbin and Drew and about Seth Rollins and what he did to Rey Mysterio and how that has repercussions elsewhere. All right. So what do we got? Oh, we got fucking R-Truth, which is always fun. And Lashley comes out and freaking that fireman's carry and bashing him into the post was amazing. Full Nelson for the submission looked really, really great. And then showing Lana losing it inexplicably. Again, all these things didn't work smoothly together, but the strength of the performances somehow carries the segment and makes it all okay, which is a really important lesson there. Yeah. If you're doing things that sort of make a logical, linear sense, then the strength of performances can carry it through. When you're doing a thing that doesn't feel logical or true to the performers, then they're having to work from behind. I think we're seeing that with the Viking Warriors and the Street Profits. They're putting them in a situation where it's hard to look good because the writing is so bad and the situation so implausible. But when you put somebody in a thing that makes sense, R-Truth, he gets to get his spiel out about Tom Brady and he's going to get that title again, haha. But, Lashley, they're treating serious as a fucking heart attack. And it makes for a great contrast, and it makes them both look good. R-Truth doesn't lose anything by getting destroyed by Lashley here, because his character at this point is beyond wins and losses. It really is. And it's really about his singular focus for his 24/7 and all the rest of the funny stuff he says title. And then Lashley gets to come out and get a little over on R-Truth, get to be clearly the heel, because R-Truth is clearly the face. R-Truth, by the way, is one of the few clear faces that they have. And then Lana losing it just sort of keeps her in your mind's eye. I thought it was just it's a segment, a series of segments that worked in spite of itself, just because of the strength of the performances, and at least everybody was acting in this sort of logical, linear fashion. Then we get this Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross win the titles bit, and the Iconics doing their thing. Boy, this thing was shit. And the Iconics was shit. The match was herky-jerky, and it suffers from what a lot of the women's matches suffer from, if we're being honest. Not all of them, but many of them, especially on the more undercardish parts. Charlotte's great. Charlotte's stuff works. I think the Bayley-Sasha stuff really works to the point where often it's the best stuff on any show they're on, including pay-per-views. And Asuka stuff works. And Becky Lynch stuff works. But underneath, the matches really look scripted and choreographed and herky-jerky and based on moves. And the sells are, while they're done in this very cursory fashion. I'm not feeling what the women tend to do. And I think it's because they're not gifted at engaging you. And again, at the main event level for the women, this is not the case, but there's a huge discrepancy, and this match it shows it, because Alexa Bliss, who is a good performer, really feels like she's trying to carry this thing through. Nikki Cross is workwoman-like, I guess, but there's nothing really engaging about her. And the Iconics are the very definition of trying too hard, but at least they're trying, I suppose. And I did enjoy the finish of disqualified for throwing Bliss repeatedly into the post. But then we have a segment of them later on where her partner is like, logically is like, what the fuck? This was our shot at the tag titles. Why did you do that? And then slaps her. And then they hug and it's okay. Again, it just feels like, and there's so much of the show that feels like this, where you're being punished for engaging with it. And it's a thing that repeats, and I think it's reflected in crowd numbers, or just people watching and how those numbers are going down. It's not because of COVID, folks. It's because this show is not good. And it's because the writing is garbage and the performances come across as really amateurish. If wrestling's competition, get this through your heads, and I'm going to say it right now. Wrestling's competition is not other wrestling groups. It is television itself, which has never been better. Even the shitty television is well done. Even these endless stream of competition shows like America's Got Talent and all this stuff do a better job of cutting their thing up and packaging it, right? Here's something that will blow your mind. As many people as engage with like Raw and SmackDown in these small blurbs on the YouTube channel for WWE, and before you pat yourself on the back and it's like, see, WWE's still strong. They get hundreds of thousands and even a million views for individual segments, even millions of views. You know who else does that? Fucking Wild 'N Out. Yes, that Nick Cannon show. Take a look at their channel, and they have these like 3 or 4 minute bits that they put up. The best of this comedian, or, you know, the best of this battle rap thing that we do. And every one of those gets millions of views. Equitable to the WWE, but their thing costs way less to produce. And they can churn that stuff out infinitely. And their audience going down can be excused by, they went from MTV to MTV2, but they still managed to be really relevant. Whereas WWE, man, they gotta get better at this shit, man. And like this tag thing exemplifies it. Are Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross faces or heels? Because last time I checked, they were heels, but they certainly don't come across as heels here. They come across as victims. Faces are victims in the WWE almost exclusively. And when faces go over, it matters so little that the heels will openly acknowledge that they lost, because they know that the wins and losses don't matter. That's the message that comes across. And this women's tag segment just exemplifies all of that. And after one of the another Asuka Nia Jax segment, we get Shayna Baszler, who I'm a big fan of because I saw a lot of her indie stuff, and she's kept that same look. I was so happy when they let her keep that freaking terrifying look that she's got. She really looks like a monster, and in spite of booking, she still comes across that way. And she's going to take on Natalya in a match that's inexplicably a submission match, which again I think is really, again, just another stip match. The theme of this Raw is nothing really matters. And again, you know, you have a stip match to have a stip match, where Natalya is clearly playing into Shayna Baszler's hands, which seems really weird. You'd think you would want to avoid. Again, as Shayna Baszler, like, even if they did a thing where Natalya's like, we know the only way you can win is by submission. You can't, you know, I'm going to strike. I don't know. Like, something that isn't just a submission match to have a submission match, because in the end of the day, it didn't really matter because this was a glorified squash. So why set a stipulation at all? Why not just have a fucking match? It's weird. All right, so Shayna Baszler wins quickly. Rear naked choke. Which again, a rear naked choke is a choke out. Natalia's upset, and so apparently this is a thing that she's done before. So they're setting up for the Kevin Owens show. Nobody checks on Natalya. Again, there's this. It's hard for us to believe that any of this shit is real when somebody's hurt and nobody is there to help them or comfort them or basically make sure they're okay. If it's supposed to be a sport in any way, shape, or form, and you can say, oh, it's sports entertainment. No, but you would still check on people, right? But nobody does, and so she's alone, and they're setting up the Kevin Owens set, and so she just trashes it. And I guess that's what a heel turn is. You trash stuff. I'm going to go on about this a little bit. How much I hated it. Because then you get... So she's trashing the thing. Then you go to Garza and Theory, and they show where they were arguing. And then they cut to them this week, and they're still arguing and standing in the same positions with different clothes. So the impression that I got, I jokingly said to people I was texting with, so they've been arguing for a week? Because that's the impression that they're giving. And again, you're saying, well, of course they weren't arguing all, but that's the story that they're telling us by doing these smash cuts. And for example, like Sting would wrestle Vampiro in the waning days of WCW when shit was just so badly done, right? And so Sting is covered in blood from a thing that happens. And then he shows up on next week's show or after the pay-per-view or whatever, and he's still covered in blood, and it's fucking ludicrous, right? I'm like, so he didn't shower the time between the blood happened and now? That's the impression that they're giving with having them argue in the exact standing in the same positions as they were the week before. Do you see that? Again, it's just it seems like a minor thing, but it's not, because it shows that there's a lack of writing, a lack of editing, a lack of somebody who's making decisions that make sense. Yeah, and again, this is smashed into the Natalya thing. So now we go to the Kevin Owens show because, you know, Austin Theory and Garza and Zelina and all of them are going to be guests. But the set's still trashed. Which, again, I know you're saying, so what? Kevin Owens has to see this trash set. Can't they have people in the midst of cleaning it up? Isn't that what would really happen? Do we really believe that Vince McMahon would produce a product and put it on television where a set was trashed? The answer to all these things is no. They should be in the midst of fixing it up. And then Kevin Owens shows up and goes like, oh, fuck, she trashed my fucking set. So we can continue to put that thing over, but have things work logically. I know I keep saying that phrase and you're probably getting annoyed with it, but you shouldn't be. Because it starts with logic. Because with logic, you build trust with your, oh my God, this is going to be one of the most important fucking things I say or ever say about wrestling. You start with logic because that builds trust. With trust, you can establish an emotional connection. With emotional connection, you create true loyalty and interest in what you're doing, and everything is amplified. You make more money, you get a bigger audience, and people are excited about your product instead of watching it out of fucking habit. So now they're on the talk show with Kevin Owens. And again, one of these things that I thought actually worked. Apollo Crews comes down and attacks, right? And the attack looks awesome. Apollo Crews is the most fired up guy on this whole fucking show, which really says wonders for him and separates him from the look of Bobby Lashley. And again, I think you want to do that as much as you can. Oh, Steve, are you saying all black guys look alike? No. But you're lying to yourself if you're saying that at times you don't mentally confuse Apollo Crews with Lashley. So they're having Apollo Crews grow a beard. Smart. They're having him do a different kind of thing than Lashley. Smart. But here's what's not smart. They immediately go to a fucking commercial when we're having all this fucking heat going on, and it's awesome. How should they have done? And then we come back and there's a tag match with Apollo Crews and Kevin Owens against Zelina's crew. if the goal was to hook and drag us through the commercial, they failed. What they should have done is you have this fucking great heat segment. Apollo Crews is swinging away like wild. Kevin Owens jumps in. They get separated. They scream about, let's have a tag match. And then you go to commercial, and then you come back and they're having a tag match, and you're not having to reset. They're constantly doing this thing where they get into something awesome, and then they cut it off. And that's how it feels. They cut it off with the fucking commercial. And then you come back and you're having to like mentally go like, oh wait, what's this? What's happening? What's going on? There's nothing that drags you through the commercial and makes you want to engage and keep with it. And it's such a fucking failure. So Apollo Crews, they let shine in this thing, which is again another logical decision that they've made. They beat down Austin Theory, right? Which, again, I really like that they beat down Austin Theory, but my fear was, oh no, now they're going to have Austin Theory against these guys in a feud, and I'm just not interested in seeing it. But they managed to get out of that. But I would say overall, this segment really worked. It made Apollo Crews look great. It gave Kevin Owens something to do, and it got rid of Austin Theory in a logical way, because in the match, it was his miscue that cost them the match. I'm all about it. I'm all about it. No doubt about it. I mean, I would just say that cut to commercial when Apollo Crews was beating the fuck out of him was the only thing that they did absolutely wrong. And they probably lost people in that commercial who didn't get to see the other logical stuff they did that really, really worked. And they lost people who could have seen Austin Theory getting kicked out of that group that didn't need to miss that segment and probably would have appreciated it. All right, home stretch. So we've got, again, Drew McIntyre now cutting a promo. And let me say something about these promos, right? Where you've got Kayla Braxton. I think they're making Kayla Braxton look really bad because I don't think these interview segments, I think they're pre-taped, and so they're kind of wedging them in here, there, and everywhere. But when something really happens that's serious, like Austin Theory taking a savage beating, and then they cut to her being really happy, I think it really does the segment that just happened a disservice, and I think it does her a disservice, and then it makes the promo that comes a disservice as well. How do you solve this? You have her address what just happened. Austin Theory getting savagely beaten, really, really disturbing stuff. And then you have Drew McIntyre address it too. It's like, yeah, this is a brutal world here in the WWE. However, and then go into his thing. Simple, easy solutions. By the way, because now I'm reminded of this part's going to become really serious. So, you have Shad Gaspar, who probably died, and it's just a tragic thing. In California on the beach, and a riptide comes, and he and his 10-year-old son are getting swept up in this along with other people, and so the rescue people come, and he has them to make sure that he takes care of his son, and then he goes missing, and then they called off the search, and it doesn't look good. And none of this is addressed on the program. He worked there, and I thought it was horrible. Now, you can say that this whole thing was pre-taped, and that's absolutely true, but this news came out hours before Raw went on the air, and I think to not talk about it, even if it's just just go like, we're thinking about you, Shad, and you're a great guy, and we just pray that it's going okay. To not address it at all. So what is it? We're going to wait till he's officially pronounced dead to say anything? I just thought it was just such a bad look by the WWE. And maybe nobody else but me is going to call this kind of thing out, but I went on and on and on about it with the people that I was messaging and texting. I thought it was just shit that they didn't mention anything or say anything. Really bad, man. Sorry to bring this whole thing down, but I just thought that was really terrible to not say anything about it. Now we go into axe throwing bullshit, which luckily I've already talked about, so I don't have to talk about again. We have Aleister Black versus Murphy. This is my favorite segment of the whole thing. So Aleister Black beats Murphy or he's beating Murphy. But Austin Theory's still out there because he was beat down. And Seth Rollins has this great moment where they don't really say anything to each other, but he helps him up. And everything is conveyed through the performance. I am not a big Seth Rollins fan, but I will say that the segment absolutely worked because of Seth Rollins and his power and his charisma and what he's able to convey without words. And again, I will draw a comparison to Brody Lee and the Dark Order in AEW, which is absolutely failing. And this absolutely is not. Seth Rollins has one person, and that's Murphy. But now he's got another one because Austin Theory goes in the ring and they beat down Aleister Black together. And it completely works, and it feels like an upgrade for Austin Theory, even though he has just gotten beaten up and kicked out of a group. It feels like an upgrade for him. That's the sign of a successful move booking-wise. And more importantly, hopefully we will not have Austin Theory against Selena's crew because nobody wants to see it. Nobody fucking cares. They can go on and do their shit with Apollo Crews. And now Austin Theory can be part of Seth Rollins' thing. And it feels like an upgrade, and it feels like a great move all around. Wow, this little talking segment of mine has really veered off. I mean, it was my favorite segment, yet my biggest gripe was about not addressing the Shad stuff at all. So biggest gripe, greatest segment. Here it was. All right, so now we're really, really heading into the home stretch. We get a great promo for Apollo Crews where he challenges for the U.S. title. It's logical based on what we've seen. We got some axe throwing stuff, but I'm going to ignore that because I've already talked about it. And then Drew McIntyre comes to the ring for our main event. And he comes to the ring first. Begs the question, why is Drew fucking McIntyre in the ring first? It makes no sense. Then we go to a commercial to cut that off, which is weird. Then we get another axe throwing scene, which again takes away from the power of the main event, and it feels really stupid. Then Corbin comes to the ring. Why is Corbin coming to the ring second? None of that makes sense. You could have accomplished the exact same thing by having Corbin come to the ring first and do all his ceremonial shit, and then Drew would have got his big entrance. I don't get it. And then Lashley's at the top of the ramp with MVP, which I thought was really good. It sort of builds up some tension, anticipation. Ooh, they're there to challenge the winner, I guess. Awesome. The match between Corbin, who I'm not a huge fan of, and Drew McIntyre is really good. And I thought King Corbin, did a great job of doing something really hard, which is he looks like he's no threat to Drew McIntyre whatsoever, just body-wise. Drew McIntyre is built like a fucking god. He's the babyface champion that the WWE loves. But the problem with that is you got to have dragons to slay, and King Corbin's not much of a dragon. But they do a good job. The structure of the match I loved. Whoever helped them put this match together. Just small things like Corbin gets whipped to the corner, does his little gimmick where he slides around the pole, comes back in and levels Drew to sort of take over. Hits that superplex. The end sequence really worked, and then it culminates with Corbin doing the slide around the pole thing again, but this time he gets caught and he takes the Claymore and he gets pinned. Really good end sequence. How was this Raw? If their goal was to gain an audience from people watching the first time, unless they landed on one or two of the segments that really flowed and worked, I don't think they did that. And again, the Shad thing really overshadows it for me, that the fact that they didn't address that or say anything about that at all throughout the course of this entire 3-hour show, which I get that it's pre-taped and it certainly showed signs of it. But here's my thing. If this stuff is all pre-taped, why isn't it put together in a more logical way where things aren't fighting against each other, where, Kayla Braxton isn't coming in with an interview that's a completely different tone than the thing that just happened or what they're trying to convey overall. It's really strange. They got to put in the work. But I certainly put in the work, and now I'm going to put this thing out as a whole and then chop it up into the individual segments for people, which is a whole lot more work than it appears that Raw is showing, and it shouldn't be that way. I'm hoping as I continue to watch Raw that it improves from here. That's what I'm certainly hoping for. Thanks a lot for listening.